You looked like you were fine. You kept showing up, smiling when people expected you to, staying calm when the room needed it, and holding everything together so well that no one ever questioned how you were really doing. But inside, you were breaking quietly, piece by piece, while everyone around you assumed you were the strong one who didn't need help. You didn't want to burden anyone, so you swallowed the pain and told yourself to keep going even when you felt like you were drowning. And the hardest part, no one noticed. They didn't see the weight behind your smile, the exhaustion in your eyes, or the way your energy dimmed every time you gave more of yourself to people who never gave back. This video is for the INFJ who have carried silent battles for far too long, who have been there for everyone else while silently hoping someone would finally see them. You're not weak for feeling this way, and you're not alone. You kept smiling when people looked your way, nodding along in conversations, offering comfort to others, and playing the role of the calm, steady presence everyone came to rely on. They saw you as composed, unshakable, and endlessly patient, and you became so good at carrying that image that even you started to believe it was true. But what no one saw was how heavy it felt to hold that mask in place, how much it cost you to keep showing up while your own heart was breaking in silence. Every time you laughed, it was a small act of survival, a way to convince yourself you were okay when everything inside felt like it was falling apart. You didn't want to make anyone uncomfortable with your pain, so you tucked it away, telling yourself that your struggles weren't important, that other people had it worse, that you could handle it alone. You told yourself you had to be strong because that's who you were for everyone else. And so you carried the weight quietly. You answered calls and checked in on people even when you felt like you couldn't breathe under your own sadness. You showed up for others, held space for them, and listened deeply, all while hoping that maybe, just maybe, someone would look closely enough to see past your smile. But they didn't. They saw the version of you they wanted to see, the one who always had it together, who never asked for anything, who seemed fine no matter what. And each time you offered your energy to someone else while your own heart felt empty, the loneliness grew sharper, the silence inside louder, and the ache of feeling unseen became harder to ignore. You weren't looking for someone to fix your pain. You just wanted someone to notice that you were in it. To see the way your eyes looked tired even when your lips were curved into a smile, to care enough to ask, "Are you really okay?" and mean it, because the truth is, you weren't. And behind that quiet, calm exterior, you were hurting in ways no one ever saw. You were the one everyone turned to when they needed comfort, guidance, or a safe space to fall apart. You listened patiently, offering your energy without hesitation, making sure people felt seen and understood in a world that often overlooks quiet suffering. You picked up on the subtle shifts in their voices, the hesitation in their words, the sadness behind their smiles, and you responded with kindness they didn't even know how to ask for. You were the anchor, the calm in their storms, the steady presence that made them feel like they weren't alone in what they were going through. It was so natural for you to show up for others that it never crossed your mind to expect the same in return. But in the moments when your heart felt heavy, when the silence of your own room became suffocating, you found yourself waiting for someone to notice your absence, your tiredness, your quiet need for comfort. You didn't know how to say, "I need help," because you were the helper, the strong one, the one who was always okay. You hoped that the same people you held together in their dark moments would look closely enough to see that you were unraveling too, that you were exhausted from carrying not just your own pain, but the weight of everyone else's. But the silence that came instead was louder than any words could have been, reminding you that people had become so used to your strength that they forgot you might need someone too. You kept showing up, even on days when your soul felt empty, convincing yourself that your needs could wait, that your feelings could stay buried a little longer. You didn't want to burden anyone with your struggles, so you tucked them away, telling yourself that you could handle it because you always did. But deep down, it hurt. It hurt to realize that while you were there for everyone else, no one was there for you in the way you needed. It hurt to see how easily your silence was accepted, how your quiet suffering was overlooked because you had made it look so effortless to keep going. And in that hurt, you learned the painful truth: being there for everyone doesn't guarantee that anyone will be there for you. And while you kept giving, you quietly broke in the spaces where no one thought to look. You held on longer than anyone knew, quietly hoping that things would change, that the person you cared about would finally see how much you were hurting and step up. You told yourself that every relationship has rough patches, that maybe you just needed to be more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. You believed in the potential you saw in them, in the glimpses of connection that made you feel like the effort was worth it. You replayed every moment of kindness, every promise they made, using those memories to justify why you stayed, even when deep down you knew you were being drained piece by piece. You convinced yourself that leaving would make you the selfish one, that it was your responsibility to hold the connection together, to keep trying, to keep showing up, even when your messages went unanswered, even when your needs were ignored, even when the silence between you grew heavier than any words could fix. You stayed. You kept hoping that if you just gave a little more, tried a little harder, loved a little deeper, they would finally see your worth, appreciate your presence, and give you the same energy you were pouring out for them without question. But what you didn't realize was that your hope was costing you pieces of yourself, pieces you didn't have to spare. The longer you stayed, the lonelier you felt, sitting next to someone who made you feel invisible, unheard, unseen. You laughed when you wanted to cry, stayed silent when you wanted to scream, and convince yourself that your feelings didn't matter as much as maintaining the connection did. And every time you thought about walking away, you felt guilty, as if your absence would cause more harm than the quiet pain you were enduring by staying. You weren't weak for wanting it to work. You weren't foolish for holding on to the hope that things could get better. You were human, longing for connection, longing to be loved and seen in the way you were so ready to give to others. But the truth was, staying didn't heal the loneliness. It made it sharper. It made you question your worth, your needs, your right to be loved in return. And while you stayed in a connection that drained you, hoping for it to change, you learned the hardest truth. Sometimes the loneliest place you can be is right next to someone who doesn't see you. You were terrified that if you spoke your truth, if you let people see the pain you were carrying, they would leave. You learned to hide your tears behind practiced smiles, to swallow your struggles before they could form into words, to silence your needs so you wouldn't feel like a burden. You convinced yourself that staying quiet was the only way to keep people close, that if you let them see how deeply you felt, how much you were hurting, they would call you too sensitive, too emotional, too much. So you nodded and laughed and showed up with calm energy, even when your heart was breaking, even when your mind was screaming for relief. Every time you considered opening up, you heard the echoes of past moments where your vulnerability was met with discomfort or indifference, where your honesty pushed people away instead of bringing them closer. You remembered the blank stares, the awkward silences, the quick changes of subject that made you feel like your pain was an inconvenience. So you decided it was safer to carry it alone, to keep your darkness hidden so others could stay comfortable in your light. You told yourself that being easy to be around meant being quiet about your struggles, that your worth was tied to your ability to hold it together no matter what you were going through inside. But deep down, you were longing for someone to see past the mask, to notice the weariness in your eyes and the heaviness in your voice. You wished for someone to lean in and say, "You don't have to hide it with me," but that moment never came. Instead, you became the person everyone relied on while quietly craving the same gentle care you offered to others so effortlessly. And with every day you kept your struggles hidden, you built a wall between yourself and the world, hoping it would keep people close, but only making you feel more alone. You feared that if you showed your truth, people would leave. But what you didn't realize was that hiding your pain didn't protect you from loneliness, it ensured it. Because the more you silenced yourself, the more invisible you felt, waiting for someone to see the tears you hid behind your smile, waiting for someone to care enough to ask, "How are you really?" And as you kept choosing silence, you convinced yourself it was strength, even when it was slowly breaking you inside. You've spent your life carrying every dismissal, every rejection, every moment when someone ignored your feelings and made you feel like you were too much. You didn't just feel the sting in the moment, you took it inside, letting it echo in your mind long after everyone else had moved on. You questioned yourself endlessly. wondering if you were wrong for feeling so deeply, if your emotions were an inconvenience that pushed people away. Every time you tried to share your heart and it was brushed aside with a quick nod or a change of subject, you told yourself it was your fault, that you should have stayed quiet, that you were making things harder, that you were a burden. You learned to replay those moments late at night, analyzing your words, your tone, the way you expressed your needs, looking for the flaw that made people pull away. You convinced yourself that if you could just be less emotional, less sensitive, less needy, people would stay. So you started editing yourself, shrinking your feelings, forcing smiles when you were hurting, laughing when you wanted to cry, nodding in agreement when you wanted to scream, that you were not okay. And the more you silenced yourself, the more you believed the lie that your feelings were a problem that needed to be hidden. Each rejection became a quiet scar you carried, proof that you weren't worth the emotional space you needed. You started to think that asking for understanding was selfish, that wanting someone to care was too much, that needing comfort was a weakness. So you built walls around your heart, convincing yourself that if you didn't let people in, they couldn't leave you. If you didn't share your pain, they couldn't dismiss it. But inside, you were screaming for someone to see you, to prove to you that your feelings were not too much, that your heart was not a burden, that you were worthy of being held just as you are. You never asked for the world. You just wanted to be understood, to have someone sit with you in your feelings instead of pushing them away, to hear you without judgment, to make you feel like your emotions were valid. But when that didn't happen, you decided it was easier to carry it alone, telling yourself it was safer that way, even if it meant living with the constant weight of unspoken feelings and quiet heartbreak. And through it all, you blamed yourself, never realizing that your death was never the problem. It was their inability to hold it that was. You always hoped that someone would notice, that someone would look past your practiced smile, past your calm tone, past the way you kept showing up and see the exhaustion hiding in your eyes. You didn't want to beg for attention, didn't want to spell out your pain, didn't want to explain every bruise on your heart just to be seen. You wanted someone to care enough to pay attention, to notice the heaviness in your silence, the hesitation in your laughter, the way you pulled back even as you tried to stay close. You wanted someone to ask, "Are you okay?" and mean it, not out of obligation, but out of genuine concern. You wanted someone to sit with you in the quiet, to watch your eyes when you said you were fine and gently call out the lie, to hold space for the pain you didn't have the words to share. You didn't need them to fix you. You didn't need them to have all the answers. You just needed them to see you, to recognize that behind the strength you showed every day was a heart that was tired, a mind that was overwhelmed, a spirit that was carrying too much alone. But that moment rarely came. People saw what they wanted to see, the dependable one, the strong one, the calm one, and never thought to look deeper. They accepted your "I'm fine" without question, never noticing the small cracks in your armor, the moments your eyes went distant, the way your laughter didn't quite reach your soul. And every time they missed it, it confirmed your fear that maybe you were invisible, that your feelings were too much for anyone to handle, that your pain was something you were destined to carry alone. You hoped someone would see the sadness behind your smile, the fatigue beneath your consistency, the longing in your eyes for someone to simply care enough to notice. You dreamed of a connection where you didn't have to spell out your needs, where your silence wasn't taken as peace, but as a sign that you needed comfort. You wanted someone to see you the way you saw others, to sense your unspoken hurt, to offer warmth without being asked. But when no one did, you told yourself to keep going, to keep showing up, to keep pretending, because hoping for someone to notice without being told became too painful. When no one ever did, you didn't walk away in a storm of anger. You didn't leave to prove a point or to make anyone feel guilty. You left quietly, almost invisibly, after fighting silent battles for far too long while no one noticed. Before you ever physically walked away, you had already been pulling back in small ways, testing if anyone would see the distance growing in your eyes, the softness fading in your voice, the energy draining from your presence. You didn't want to leave. You wanted someone to stop you, to ask why you were withdrawing, to reach into the silence and remind you that you were worth holding on to. But no one did. So you stayed longer, trying to convince yourself to be patient, to keep giving, to keep loving in the hope that things would change. You gave chances in your mind that you never spoke aloud, waiting for someone to notice that your smiles had become strained and your laughter had grown hollow. You kept showing up for conversations that left you empty, for connections that left you feeling lonelier than being alone, hoping that the people you cared for would finally see the pain you were hiding beneath your calm exterior. Each day you stayed, a small piece of your hope quietly unraveled. You realized that the people you were waiting on to notice your struggle were too wrapped up in themselves to see you, too comfortable with your strength to imagine you could be breaking. And as you came to this truth, your heart began to detach, not with resentment, but with resignation. You didn't hate them for not seeing you. You simply understood that staying meant betraying yourself, that your silence was no longer protecting peace, but prolonging your pain. When you finally left, it was not dramatic. It was a soft exit, a quiet letting go that felt like both a heartbreak and a relief. No one saw how much it hurt you to leave, how many tears you swallowed, how much you wished it could have been different. They only saw your absence, never realizing the thousands of moments you gave before choosing to walk away. You didn't leave because you stopped caring. You left because you had to care for yourself in a way no one else ever did. There comes a moment when you realize that waiting for someone else to choose you, to care for you, to see you is like waiting for rain in a drought. You spent so long giving your heart, your energy, your presence, hoping that one day the people you held space for would turn around and hold space for you. You stayed not out of weakness, but out of love, out of loyalty, out of hope that the silent pain you carried would finally be seen. You wanted to believe that if you just loved harder, gave more, stayed longer, they would notice the exhaustion in your eyes and the cracks in your smile and finally ask, "How are you really doing?" But they didn't. And you came to understand that it wasn't because you were unworthy or unlovable or too much. It was because people had grown used to your strength, your calm, your ability to hold yourself together while holding them together too. They didn't see your silent suffering because you made it look easy. You smiled when you were crumbling. You laughed when your heart was heavy. You showed up for them even when you were empty inside. And they never thought to look deeper, never thought that the one who was always there might need someone too. So you chose yourself, not in a moment of anger or bitterness, but in a quiet, decisive moment of truth. You realized that no one was coming to save you, to heal you, to give you the love and care you needed. You realized that you could no longer keep bleeding for people who never even saw the cuts. Choosing yourself was never about revenge. It was never about making them feel the emptiness you felt. It was about survival. It was about finally deciding that your well-being mattered, that your peace mattered, that you deserved to be loved, not just by others, but by yourself. Leaving was painful. It felt like tearing yourself away from a hope you clung to for far too long. But as you walked away, you felt a weight begin to lift. Not because everything was suddenly okay, but because you were finally allowing yourself to heal. You were giving yourself the care you had begged for in silence. You weren't abandoning them, you were returning to yourself. Choosing yourself wasn't selfish. It was the bravest, most necessary act of love you could give yourself after carrying invisible pain for so long. If you've ever felt invisible in your pain, know that you're not alone. You don't have to explain why you feel deeply or why you stayed quiet while you were breaking inside. Here, you are seen exactly as you are, without needing to shrink yourself to fit into a world that doesn't always notice. If this spoke to you, consider subscribing to Brainy One so you always have a place that reminds you your quiet strength is real and your feelings are valid. Come back anytime you need a reminder that you matter, and you always have.